My daughter-in-law snapped. Don't expect a single cent from your son's 25 million. Her tone dripped with contempt, like I was a beggar instead of his father. But at the will reading, her face turned ghostly white when the lawyer read, "My name." Before we go on, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment with the time where you are watching this. The wrench slipped from my oil-stained hand the instant I heard the doctor's voice. Metal clanged against the concrete, echoing through my garage like a gunshot. "Mr. Fox, I'm sorry to tell you, your son Ethan has passed away. He suffered a massive heart attack at his office this morning." The words rattled around my skull, refusing to settle. Ethan, heart attack. My boy was only 42. I slid down the wall until I hit the floor, the cold concrete pressing through my shirt. "Sir, are you still there?" "I'm here." My voice sounded hollow, like it came from somewhere far away. "When did this happen?" "Just after 11 this morning. His secretary found him at his desk. Paramedics tried everything, but he was gone before they arrived." Gone. The word twisted in my chest like a knife. I stared under the old Ford pickup. Oil stains told the story of decades of repairs. 37 years of fixing what was broken, yet I couldn't fix this. "Mr. Fox, someone will need to make arrangements. Should we contact family? His wife Joyce?" The name tasted bitter. "I'll call her." After hanging up, I stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, though only minutes passed. The Texas heat pushed through the open garage door, carrying the smell of dust and motor oil. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning, but nothing would ever be the same. I forced myself up, legs shaking, and walked to the workbench. Next to a coffee can full of screws sat a photo of 8-year-old Ethan, proudly holding a fish from Lake Meredith. His gap-toothed grin could have lit up the whole garage. That little boy had been so proud of a catch barely bigger than his hand. My phone felt like lead as I dialed Joyce's number. It went straight to voicemail. "You've reached Joyce. Fox, please leave a detailed message, and I'll return your call when I can." Even her voicemail sounded cold and distant, like talking to a stranger. "Joyce, it's Samuel. I just heard about Ethan. Call me back as soon as you get this. We need to make arrangements." I tried again 20 minutes later. Same result. An hour later, still nothing. By the 6th call, my hands shook with anger and desperation. "Joyce, this is the 6th time I've called. I know you're there. We don't get along, but this isn't about us. Please call me back." I threw the phone against the wall. It bounced, clattering across the floor, battery cover flying off. The silence afterward was crushing, pressing in like deep water. The photo of Ethan stared back at me, frozen in time. Before business school, before California, before Joyce, for the distance between us grew like weeds left untended. I picked up the broken phone and snapped it together. A crack ran across the screen, but it still worked, like me damaged, but still functioning. The decision formed slowly, like rust creeping over steel. I couldn't sit in that garage waiting for Joyce to decide. I mattered. Ethan was my son, my only child. Margaret and I had waited years for him. He was our miracle. I pulled my old canvas duffel from the closet and started packing. 3 changes of clothes, my shaving kit, the photo of Ethan. My hands moved on their own while my mind tried to make sense of this new life. No more Sunday calls where Ethan excitedly told me about his latest real estate deal. No more Christmas cards of him in front of bigger and bigger houses. The drive to Los Angeles would take 12 hours if I pushed it. I had made the trip once when Ethan graduated business school. Back then, Joyce still pretended to tolerate me. Back then, I still believed I had a place in their world. I folded Ethan's photo carefully between 2 shirts. The frame's glass had a tiny crack from where I dropped it years ago. I'd never fixed it. Now I wished I had. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garage. Tomorrow I would lock this place and head west to a son I'd never see again, and a daughter-in-law who wished I didn't exist. But that night, I sat on the workbench and cried for the boy who'd once been so proud of a tiny fish. At dawn, the truck door slammed shut as the first pink light crept across the Texas sky. I'd spent the whole night packing and repacking, trying to keep busy while my mind spun. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, peeked through her window as I loaded the last bag. Her brow furrowed in concern. I waved, but couldn't explain. How do you tell someone your entire world just ended? The highway stretched ahead like a ribbon I didn't want to follow. Interstate 40 would carry me through New Mexico, Arizona, and into California. 12 hours of driving with nothing but my thoughts and the ghosts of conversations I'd never have with Ethan again. Miles blurred past in desert silence. The radio offered traffic updates and weather reports for a world that hadn't stopped. I reached for the dial, then let my hand drop. Silence felt truer. Somewhere outside Albuquerque, a memory hit me like a punch. Ethan at 8, standing in our backyard with a baseball glove too big for his hands. Margaret hanging laundry, humming softly. "Dad, when will I be as big as you?" Ethan had asked, squinting up at me. "Hold the ball with both hands, son. You'll get there." I knelt to his level, adjusted his grip. "Keep your eye on the ball, no matter how fast it comes." He nodded with that serious look kids get when something matters. We spent an hour tossing the ball, while white sheets danced in the breeze like flags. The memory hit so hard I had to pull over at a rest stop. I sat gripping the steering wheel, tears blurring everything. When had we stopped playing catch? When had he grown too busy for me? "Long drive ahead, Grandpa." The gas station attendant smiled kindly. He couldn't have been more than 20. Something in his face reminded me of Ethan at that age. "Going to see my son," I heard myself say. "Though I guess I'm too late." The boy's face softened with wordless understanding. "Sorry for your loss, sir. Drive safe." Back on the highway, another memory hit me. Ethan at 26, calling to brag about his first big real estate deal. His voice had been buzzing with excitement, the same way it used to when he learned a new baseball pitch. "Dad, I just closed my biggest deal yet. Bought a $3 million property in Beverly Hills. I'd been in this same garage, Elbit, in a neighbor's transmission. That's more money than I'll see in a lifetime. Boy, maybe I should come visit. See what you've built out there." But I never did. There was always another car to fix. Another excuse to stay in Texas, where things made sense, where I didn't have to fake knowing about wine lists, or worry about saying the wrong thing too. Joyce's fancy friends. The landscape shifted as I drove west. Texas plains gave way to New Mexico desert, then Arizona mountains. Each mile pulled me further from the life I knew, and closer to the world where my son had lived and died. A world I never really knew. By evening, Los Angeles spread out before me like a glowing circuit board. Freeway signs pointed toward Beverly Hills, toward addresses that felt like another universe compared to my garage in Amarillo. My truck suddenly felt smaller, surrounded by sleek luxury cars gliding by like schools of expensive fish. Ethan's neighborhood was a maze of perfect lawns and homes that looked more like museums than houses. Every driveway had cars worth more than what I'd made in 5 years. Palm trees lined the streets like guards, their fronds whispering secrets. I found the address and pulled up to gates that looked like they belonged to a castle. Through the iron bars, I saw a mansion big enough to hold 3 of my houses inside, with room to spare. This was where my son lived. This was the world he'd chosen over Sunday dinners and backyard baseball. The truck engine clicked as it cooled, the only sound in the heavy silence. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Work shirt wrinkled from the long drive, stubble from a sleepless night, eyes red from grief and exhaustion. Not exactly a Beverly Hills father-in-law look, but I was here. After 12 hours of memories and regrets, I was finally here. I stepped out, took a deep breath, tasting the strange air of my son's chosen world, and reached for the gate intercom. The electronic buzz sounded like an angry wasp. Marble columns framed the entrance, each one probably worth more than my yearly income. Through the bars, I saw a circular driveway with a fountain dancing in the golden evening light. I pressed the button and waited. Somewhere inside, Joyce was deciding whether I was worth her time. "What do you want?" Her voice came through sharp enough to cut glass. "Joyce, it's Samuel. I drove from Texas. We need to talk about Ethan." Silence stretched between us like a tight wire. I could picture her in her command center room, calculating whether acknowledging me was worth the trouble. "What are you doing here, Samuel?" "I came because of Ethan. We need to discuss the funeral. I can handle everything myself. You should go back to Texas." The gate stayed shut. Lights clicked on across the property, turning the mansion into something out of a fairy tale or a nightmare, depending on how you looked at it. "I know we don't get along," I said, keeping my voice steady like I would with a suspicious customer, "but this isn't the time for that. He was my son too." A long pause. Then the gate began to swing open with mechanical precision. "Fine, but wipe your boots before you come in." I parked my dusty truck next to a Mercedes that probably costs more than my house. The sight was almost funny, like a mutt at a dog show. I took off my cap, ran a hand through my gray hair, trying to look halfway presentable. Joyce met me at the door, and I had to admit, she looked good for a grieving widow. Black designer dress with some French name, makeup perfect, not a hair out of place. She looked me up and down like I was dirt tracked onto her perfect floors. "You look terrible," she said, by way of hello. "It's been a long day." She turned and walked into the house without another word, her heels tapping against marble floors under a ceiling high enough to hold a circus. I followed, trying not to gawk at chandeliers and paintings that probably belonged in a museum. Everything was white, gold, and intimidating, like a hotel lobby designed to make you feel small. "Sit." She pointed toward a living room bigger than my whole house. The furniture looked like no one had ever used it, arranged around a marble coffee table. I sank into a couch that probably cost more than my truck, my boots looking out of place on Persian rugs worth more than most cars. Joyce stayed standing, keeping the high ground. "I've already started making arrangements," she said, her tone cool and clipped. "Funeral home, service, everything is under control." "What about the burial?" "Ethan never told me what he wanted. He'll be cremated. It's more practical." She said it like she was talking about garbage day. "There's nothing for you to do here, Samuel. I appreciate you coming, but I can handle this." I glanced out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the backyard tennis court, pool, perfect landscaping. My son had built this life. It was impressive, sure, but cold, lifeless. "When's the service?" "Friday. Very small, very private, just a few close friends." Message received. I wasn't invited. But I hadn't driven 12 hours to be turned away like a salesman. "Joyce, I'm not asking for much. I just want to say goodbye to my boy." For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not kindness exactly, but at least recognition that I was human. "All right. Friday at 3 o'clock. Sunset Memorial Chapel, Wilshire Boulevard." She sat down across from me, perched on the edge of her chair like she might bolt any second. "But this doesn't change anything between us." I never expected it to. We sat there in expensive silence. Out the windows, city lights began to glitter. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives, worrying about normal problems. I envied them. "I should find a motel," I said, standing. "I'll stop by tomorrow if there's more to discuss." Joyce walked me to the door, keeping her distance, like grief was contagious. At the threshold, she paused. "You know, Samuel, Ethan left quite an estate. I'll be managing all of it, of course. There's a lot to handle." She said it like a warning, staking her claim, letting me know where the lines were. I nodded and walked back to my truck, feeling her stare on me until I passed through the gate. Driving away from that mansion, I caught its reflection in my rearview mirror, glowing like a cruise ship against the night. My son had lived there, had walked those marble floors, stared through those windows. He had built this life, this fortune, this floorless world, and somehow, there had never been space for his old man. The marble felt ice-cold beneath my worn boots as Joyce led me farther into Ethan's world. Each step echoed through the wide hallway, bouncing off walls lined with paintings probably worth more than my home. She walked like someone who owned every inch of what she touched, her heels clicking like a countdown to something I couldn't stop. This was Ethan's office, she said, pushing open the heavy oak doors. He spent most of his time here near the end. The sight of the room stole my breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city lights, and every surface gleamed with a success I had never seen up close. Business awards lined the shelves. Pictures showed Ethan shaking hands with wealthy men in sharp suits, and a massive desk sat at the center like an altar to his work. Joyce lifted a crystal frame holding a photo of Ethan at some charity gala, both of them dressed in clothes that cost more than my truck. He loved these events. We were quite the power couple. I studied the photo. Ethan looked different than the last time I saw him. Thinner, older somehow, though he smiled for the camera. He never told me about these parties. Ethan didn't talk much about his social life with. She paused, letting the words hang like a blade. Well, he was very busy. Moving to his desk, she started pulling out papers and planners. We need to finalize the arrangements. The funeral home needs answers tonight. What about burial? Margaret's buried at Rose Hill Cemetery back home. Ethan used to visit her grave as a boy. Joyce's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Ethan always wanted cremation, not burial. He told me more than once. No, the word came out harsher than I meant. He told me he wanted to be next to his mother. You don't know what he wanted in these last few years, Samuel. Heat rose through my chest. Maybe not, but I knew him for 43 years. You've known him for 2. Her smile could have frozen water. 2 years as his wife. That counts more than decades as a distant father. The words struck like blows. My fingers gripped the edge of Ethan's desk, feeling the smooth wood beneath my calloused skin. Every award, every polished trophy, seemed to stare down like silent judges, reminding me I was never enough. Look at this. Joyce held up Ethan's phone, scrolling through contacts. Business partners, investors, golf buddies, hundreds of names that mattered to him. She scrawled with cold precision, deleting anyone she thought didn't belong. This one hasn't seen Ethan in months. This one's just a golf acquaintance. We'll keep it small, tasteful. I watched as she erased my son's life one name at a time. Each deleted contact felt like a piece of Ethan vanishing for good. What about his old college friends? The ones he grew up with? They don't fit the image we want to present. Image, not memory. Not love. Not respect for the dead. Image. Joyce made calls to funeral homes while I sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her voice was steady, professional, focused on schedules instead of grief. She chose flowers like picking produce, music like wallpaper samples. The viewing is Thursday night. Service Friday afternoon, she said, hanging up. Everything's arranged. Can I help in some way? Cover part of the cost? Another of those frozen laughs. Samuel, this funeral will cost more than you earn in 2 years. Don't worry about the money. I'll handle all of Ethan's finances from here on. The way she said it made my stomach turn, like she was already spending money that wasn't even hers yet. We finished the details through clenched teeth and fake smiles. Cremation instead of burial. Expensive flowers instead of simple ones. A guest list stripped of anyone who might have known the boy Ethan used to be. When we were done, Joyce walked me to the door with the smugness of someone who had won every round. I'll work with the lawyers once this is over. There's a lot to manage, but don't worry, I'll take care of everything. Standing at the threshold, I looked back one last time at the mansion that had been my son's world. Somewhere inside all that marble and glass, there should have been traces of the boy who once played catch with me, who once called me Dad, but all I could see was Joyce's reflection on every polished surface, her cold smile repeated like a hall of mirrors. The door closed behind me with the finality of a vault. The neon sign of the Desert Inn Motel flickered like a dying heart as I pulled my truck into the cracked parking lot. The place looked forgotten by time, paint peeling, weeds splitting. The pavement, but the price fit my pension, and no one here cared about my dusty boots. Room 13 smelled of stale smoke and cheap disinfectant. The bedspread looked older than me, and the air conditioner wheezed like an exhausted old man. Sank onto the edge of the bed, feeling the springs give under my weight. From my wallet, I pulled out 2 photos, Margaret, glowing in her wedding dress, standing beside a young man who still had all his hair and all his dreams. Next to it, Ethan on his own wedding day, smiling nervously, while Joyce posed like a cover model. I should have known that day what kind of woman she was. The memory floated up, dark and unavoidable. A warm spring afternoon in Beverly Hills, white chairs set perfectly on manicured grass. I'd worn my only suit, the same one I buried Margaret in, and felt its cheapness among Ethan's polished new world. "You sure about this, son?" I'd asked quietly. Ethan fiddled with his tie, nerves written all over him. "Dad, I'm happy for the first time since the divorce. She makes me feel alive again." Across the lawn, Joyce posed with her model friends, all long legs and perfect smiles. One whispered something, and they both looked at me. "Look at his father," she said, just loud enough. "Ethan's embarrassed by him." Joyce laughed, soft and cutting, like wind chimes in a storm. "What did you expect? Different worlds. Entirely." I saw how she looked at my old suit, my rough hands, the way I held my champagne glass like it might shatter. To her, I was just a leftover piece of Ethan's past, something that couldn't be thrown away, only hidden out of sight. The motel phone rang, yanking me out of my thoughts. No one had this number. I glanced at the clock. Past midnight. "Samuel." "What happened, friend?" "It's past midnight here." Harlan's voice cut through the silence like a lifeline. "Ethan. Gone. Heron. Heart attack. And his wife. She's nothing like our Margaret was." "I'm sorry, old buddy. How are you holding up?" I stared at the water stains on the ceiling, searching for words I didn't even understand. "She treats me like dirt under her designer shoes. Makes me feel like I don't even belong at my own son's funeral. That woman's got no class, no matter how much money she's got. And the worst part, I think Ethan knew. These last few years, he's sounded different, distant. Like he was apologizing for something he couldn't put into words." Harlan stayed quiet, breathing steady, the kind of silence that said more than words ever could. "You need me to come out there?" he asked eventually. "No," I said. "This is something I have to face alone." "But Harlan, what if I failed him? What if I let her turn him against everything we taught him?" "Samuel Fox," he said firmly, "listen to me. You raised a good boy who grew into a good man. Don't let some gold digger make you doubt 42 years of being a father." When the call ended, I lay in the dark, listening to freeway traffic, the city humming like a machine that never stopped. In a few hours, I'd have to face Joyce again, play nice for Ethan's funeral, pretend we were family instead of strangers tied together by grief and blood. Margaret's photo caught the streetlight from the window. If she were here, she'd know what to say, how to handle Joyce with quiet grace. Margaret had a strength that could make devils act like angels. But Margaret was gone. Ethan was gone, and I was alone in a cheap motel room, trying to figure out how to bury my son with dignity while his widow treated me like hired help. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. Tonight, all I could do was hold on to Margaret's memory and hope it would give me the strength for whatever Joyce had planned next. The alarm clock glowed 12:50 a.m. when I finally closed my eyes. Dawn was already creeping into the sky. The next morning, the sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Eternal Rest Funeral Home as I straightened my only black tie in the truck's rearview mirror. Thursday had passed in a blur, finding a decent suit at a thrift store, dodging Joyce's calls about last-minute details. Now, Friday had arrived, heavy with the finality I wasn't ready for. Inside, the air was thick with lilies and hushed conversations. Joyce stood near the entrance, surrounded by women in designer black and men in $1,000 suits. She'd turned grief into a social gathering, complete with air kisses and knowing glances. I signed the guest book with a pen that probably cost more than my groceries for the week, then took a seat in the back row where I could watch everything without becoming part of it. Such a tragedy, a woman whispered to Joyce, and so young. Joyce dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, makeup perfect just enough to suggest tears without smearing. Ethan worked so hard, his heart just couldn't take the stress. A man in an Italian suit stepped up, offering condolences. Joyce, if there's anything you need help with Ethan's portfolio, the properties, you're so kind, Robert, she said, smiling, but I'll handle everything personally. Personally. Like Ethan's life was just another business she'd inherited. I watched her work the room, collecting sympathy like payment. Every conversation a performance, part grief, part networking. Most of these people barely knew Ethan beyond his name on charity invites and business deals. Then her voice dropped to that sharp little whisper she thought was private. Look at that old man over there, she murmured to a blonde woman who seemed eager for gossip. Ethan was so ashamed of him. The blonde Lisa, I think, glanced at me with open pity. Joyce, surely he's grieving too. Joyce's soft laugh was pure poison. Ethan told me his father never understood him, always made him feel guilty for his success. Her words landed like open-handed slaps. Whatever distance had grown between Ethan and me, I had never made him feel ashamed of what he'd achieved. I'd been proud, maybe too proud to say it, often enough. I stood, my chair creaking loudly. Conversations died as I walked toward Joyce and her little circle of mourners. Joyce, I said evenly, this is not the time. Today, we're burying my son. Her expression shifted instantly, all wounded dignity now. Of course, Samuel, I'm just emotional. We all grieve differently, you understand. Lisa looked uncomfortable, realizing she'd been part of something cruel. The whole room had gone still, waiting for drama. Perhaps, I said softly, we should focus on Ethan today, not on each other. Joyce nodded, her face polite, but her eyes promised payback for calling her out. You're right, she said sweetly. Families should support each other at times like this. The minister called everyone to be seated. I returned to my back row seat. Joyce went back to the front, surrounded by supporters who'd forget Ethan's name in a month. Ethan Grant was a man who valued family above all else. The minister began, reading from notes I knew Joyce had written. He built not just a business empire, but lasting relationships. I stared at the casket, remembering the boy who'd been so excited about catching that fish, asking when he'd grow big like his dad. Somewhere between that backyard memory and this marble funeral home, I had lost my son to a world that measured worth in dollar signs. The service continued with hymns. Ethan never sang in readings from books he never read. Joyce's performance peaked during the eulogy, her sobs timed perfectly for effect. When it was over, people filed past the casket. I waited until last. Alone, I whispered all the things I should have said years ago, that I was proud of him, that I loved him despite everything, that I wished I'd fought harder to stay close, instead of letting Joyce's coldness push me away. Outside, the hearse waited, ready to carry my son to the cemetery. Joyce stood in the middle of her small circle of allies, already deep in conversation with a man who looked every bit the high-priced attorney. I climbed into my truck to follow the funeral procession, catching a brief glimpse of Joyce through the tinted window of her limousine. She was using a compact mirror to touch up her lipstick, her grief already shifting into something colder and more calculating. A chill ran through me as I turned the ignition. Joyce was too composed, too eager to talk about Ethan's finances, like she already knew exactly what was waiting for her. The mahogany conference table and seal. Grant's office felt as unforgiving as the earth we had just buried Ethan in. 42 stories above downtown Los Angeles, the late sun slanted through darkened glass, casting the room in a strange golden glow that made it feel more like a stage than a lawyer's office. Joyce had arrived in the limo with her entourage while I'd followed in my dusty pickup, feeling like an outsider at my own son's farewell. Now she sat at the head of the table, perfectly groomed, her sleek black dress fitting her like armor, every strand of hair exactly in place. Seal Grant looked like the picture of legal success: silver hair, an expensive suit, calm professionalism, earned from decades of mediating messy family affairs. His office walls were crowded with framed diplomas and law licenses that probably cost more than my truck was worth. "Thank you all for coming," Seal began, his tone polished and practiced, the voice of a man who had done this hundreds of times. Joyce smoothed her skirt and checked her reflection in the dark window behind her, as if making sure she still looked flawless. "Samuel, you don't have to stay," she said, without glancing my way. "You're not getting a dime of Ethan's $30 million anyway." Her words hit me like a fist to the chest, but I'd learned to live with her brand of cruelty. I started to rise, my old baseball cap clenched tight in my calloused hands, then stopped. I wanted to hear what my son had wanted. Whatever Ethan's last words for me were, I needed to know. Joyce didn't like that. "This is just a formality," she said, her voice clipped, full of the confidence of someone who never doubted her place in the world. Lisa, the blonde friend who'd shadowed Joyce all day, shifted uncomfortably. Even Tyler, Ethan's cousin from the East Coast, looked uneasy. Seal began arranging a stack of legal papers on the table, each tied with ribbon and stamped with official seals. The afternoon sun caught the gold lettering, making the documents gleam like relics of some ancient ritual. "Please, everyone, take a seat," Seal said, carefully diplomatic. Joyce leaned toward Lisa, whispering just loud enough for the rest of us to catch. "This won't take long. Ethan told me everything was taken care of." I leaned back into my leather chair, the creak sounding loud in the hushed room. Everything about this place spoke of wealth and power, the kind of world Ethan had built for himself and where I never quite belonged. Mark, one of Ethan's business partners, nervously tugged at his tie. The room went silent as Seal opened the first document, the sound of the paper unnervingly loud. Joyce's confidence filled the space like perfume sweet, cloying, and suffocating. She sat perfectly upright, hands folded, the picture of controlled anticipation. Through the window behind her, the city stretched out endlessly. Somewhere out there was the old garage where I taught Ethan about engines, the graveyard where his mother was buried, and the cheap motel where I had spent the night, wondering how I had failed him. Seal cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began. "The last will and testament of Ethan Michael Fox. Dated January 16th, 2025. Joyce tilted forward slightly, her eyes alight with hunger. I sank deeper into my chair, bracing myself for the sound of my own erasure. Seal's voice was smooth and unhurried, reading the ceremonial language that always came before a bombshell. After careful consideration of my assets and personal relationships, he continued, his professional face giving away nothing. "I make the following bests." Joyce's fingers tapped lightly on the chair's armrest, her diamond ring flashing as if to remind everyone who she was. "To my cousin, Tyler Fox, I leave my collection of vintage wines, valued at approximately $15,000. Seal paused while Tyler nodded politely. To my business partner, Mark Stevens, I leave my shares in the Riverside Development Project, valued at approximately $100,000. Joyce's smile widened with every minor bequest, her confidence hardening. These small gifts only confirmed what she believed was coming next, the big payoff. Then Seal's posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, to my father, Samuel Fox. He read, his tone calm but his glance flicking toward Joyce. I leave the majority of my estate, including all business interests, stock portfolios, and liquid assets, totaling approximately $29 million. The words detonated in the air, like a grenade. Joyce's face went white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Finally, she managed a strangled whisper. That's not possible. But Seal kept going, steady as a metronome. To my wife, Joyce Fox, I leave the Santa Monica condominium, valued at approximately $800,000, along with its furnishings and personal effects. Joyce's hand flew to her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. A moment ago, she had been a queen waiting for her crown. Now she looked like she'd been slapped. Ethan, why would you do this? I muttered, still numb. $29 million. The number didn't feel real. This must be a mistake, Joyce said sharply, leaning across the table, clutching the edge, as if she could change the words by sheer force of will. Tyler stared open-mouthed. Mark seemed to be doing math in his head. Then Lisa's face had gone pale. The will was properly executed. Mrs. Fox, Seal said, his professional calm still intact, though his shoulders were tight. These are your husband's wishes. Joyce began to shake, her composure cracking. The widow who had performed so flawlessly at the funeral was gone, replaced by someone frantic, cornered. My own hands trembled as the reality sank in. I hadn't just been remembered by my son, I had been chosen. This is fraud. Joyce's voice exploded in the quiet room, shattering it like glass. That old man manipulated Ethan while he was sick. I stayed seated, still trying to process what I'd just heard. Joyce, I didn't even know about the will, I said quietly. Liar. She spat, pointing at me with shaking hands, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. You hated me from the beginning. You turned Ethan against me. Seal finally rose to his feet, the calm mask slipping just slightly, as the room seemed to pulse with the weight of what had just happened. Mrs. Fox, this will was prepared according to every legal requirement. There was no coercion, no manipulation. Joyce's hand swept across the conference table, scattering legal documents like expensive confetti. I was his wife. I loved him, cared for him, built a life with him. Tyler and Mark pushed back their chairs, desperate to escape the storm brewing in the room. Lisa sat frozen, horrified as her friend came completely undone. You think you can just stroll in here and steal my inheritance? Joyce's voice climbed higher with every word. I know what you did. You preyed on a sick man drowning in guilt for being a lousy father. Her accusation cut deep. There was truth in it, enough to sting. I had been distant. I'd let work, and the comfort of small-town life, keep me out of Ethan's world. But manipulation, I'd barely seen him these last 2 years. Joyce, please, I began, but she cut me off with a furious gesture. Don't you dare, Joyce, please me. She clutched her designer purse like a weapon. I gave up everything for Ethan, my modeling career, my friends. I moved to this city and played the perfect wife for his business dinners. Cecile was already gathering the papers from the floor, trying to restore order. Mrs. Fox, he said calmly, you have the right to contest the will. But this outburst is helping no one. Contest it. Joyce let out a laugh that sounded more like shattered glass. I'm going to destroy it. No court will believe Ethan would choose an absent father over the wife who stood by him. She spun toward the door, then turned back for one final strike. You want to know why Ethan married me, Samuel? Because I made him feel worthy, because I understood ambition, not just fixing old trucks. The words landed like a punch. I felt every year of distance between Ethan and me, every missed visit, every phone call that ended too quickly. I won't let this stand, Joyce said, her voice like iron. See you in court. Her heels struck the marble floor like gunshots as she stormed out. At the door, she turned back one last time, her face a mask of rage. This isn't over, old man, not by a long shot. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Silence fell. The only sound was Cecile carefully stacking the papers back into neat piles. Tyler cleared his throat. I have a flight to catch. Within minutes, everyone was gone. Only Cecile and I remained. I stared at the chaos Joyce had left behind, wondering what kind of war my son's final wishes had started. Through the window, I could see the parking garage. I imagined Joyce there already, calling every ally she had. The battle lines were drawn. I was now the reluctant center of a fight I had never wanted. Cecile straightened his tie. Mr. Fox, he said quietly, you should know this is going to get complicated. 3 days later, I sat in my cheap motel room at the Desert Inn, staring at legal papers I barely understood. Its faded wallpaper and buzzing neon sign made a strange backdrop for a fight over more money than I'd ever seen in my life. Cecile had broken it down in simple terms. Joyce was challenging the will for undue influence, accusing me of manipulating Ethan during a vulnerable time. The claim burned me to the core. It painted me as the very man I had spent my whole life trying not to be. She's hired Richard Stone, Cecile had warned. He's aggressive, expensive, and specializes in overturning wills. I knew Stone by reputation, a courtroom shark with decades of victories built on emotion and technicalities. If Joyce wanted a predator, she had found one by the end of the first week. Harlan had flown in from Texas. He brought the quiet strength of an old friend with him. He looked older now, more gray, more lines around his eyes, but his handshake was still steady. She made a mistake hiring Stone, he said, setting his suitcase on the second bed. Juries don't like lawyers who push too hard. Meanwhile, across town, Joyce was writing checks she couldn't afford, feeding Stone's expensive machine. I didn't know it at the time, but desperation was already driving her. Stone's strategy soon became clear. Paint Ethan as weak, guilt-ridden, and easy to manipulate. Make me the villain, the father who suddenly cared when there was money on the table. The truth was much simpler, and much harder. I had stayed away because I didn't know how to fit into Ethan's world. Cecile worked methodically. We gathered Ethan's medical records showing his mental health was solid until the day he died. We had testimony from the notary who'd watched him sign the will, confirming he knew exactly what he was doing. We had business records proving his mind was sharp and his decisions sound. This will is airtight, Cecile assured me. Ethan was of sound mind. There was no coercion, but Stone wasn't fighting facts. He was spinning a story. During depositions, he made me out to be a calculating manipulator who'd preyed on his sick son's emotions. 3 weeks later, the court date arrived, May 21, 2025. The summons felt heavier than any weight I'd ever carried. That night, Harlan found me sitting on the edge of the motel bed. Justice will win tomorrow, friend, he said quietly. Ethan made his choice for reasons we may never know, but it was his choice. I nodded, but doubt gnawed at me. Maybe Joyce is right, I said. Maybe I don't deserve this inheritance. Harlan's reply was firm. That boy saw something in you worth trusting with $24 million. Don't dishonor his memory by doubting him now. Outside, Los Angeles pulsed with life, while I prepared to defend an inheritance I'd never even wanted. The next morning, the marble steps of Los Angeles County Superior Court felt colder than Ethan's grave. Harlan walked beside me, solid as ever. Across the plaza, Joyce emerged from a black town car with Stone. both of them dressed for victory. Courtroom 314 smelled of old wood and decades of battles. Judge Williams, sharp-eyed and calm, commanded the room. Cecile had told me she didn't suffer fools. Stone wasted no time. Your Honor, he began. This case is about an elderly man who manipulated his vulnerable son during a period of depression and illness. Samuel Fox had preyed on Ethan Grant's guilt, Joyce argued, to secure a massive inheritance he had neither earned nor deserved. Her voice carried the rhythm of a practiced preacher selling salvation, each word calibrated to hit maximum emotional effect. Joyce dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The picture of a grieving widow denied her rightful legacy. Cecile's response was calm, precise, and unshakable. Ethan Grant was mentally competent when he executed this will 3 months before his death. He made a deliberate choice to provide for his father. There is no evidence of undue influence beyond Ms. Fox's disappointment with the provisions left to her. Joyce took the stand first, her performance refined after weeks of preparation. She spoke of Ethan's struggles with depression over their strained marriage, his guilt over disappointing his father, and his vulnerability in the months before his death. Samuel would call, she said, strategically breaking her voice, and Ethan would be upset for days afterward. He felt like he had failed as a son. Stone led her through a narrative that twisted ordinary family dynamics into psychological manipulation. Every phone call became coercion. Every display of paternal love became emotional blackmail. When my turn came, the courtroom felt like 1,000 eyes, measuring me, judging me against Joyce's accusations. My hands trembled as I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, Mr. Fox. Cecile began gently. How often did you visit your son in the months before his death? Maybe 3 times in 2 years, I admitted. We spoke on holidays and birthdays, but I didn't visit much. Joyce made it clear I wasn't welcome. Did you ever ask your son for money? Never. I didn't even know he had that kind of wealth. Stone's cross-examination was relentless, trying to twist my words to fit Joyce's story. Isn't it true, Mr. Fox, that you resented your son's success? I was proud of what Ethan accomplished. Maybe I didn't understand his world, but I never resented it. And you disapproved of his marriage to Joyce. I met Joyce's eyes across the courtroom. I thought she married him for his money. The gallery stirred at my bluntness. Stone tried to frame it as vindictiveness, but Judge Williams remained unmoved. Next, the notary who had witnessed Ethan's will testified. She described a man who was tired, yes, but deliberate, someone who understood each decision he made. He had read every page, asked pointed questions, and issued precise instructions. Medical testimony confirmed Ethan's mental clarity. Business records showed sound decision-making until the day he died. Phone records disproved Joyce's claims of manipulation. By afternoon, Stone's case was collapsing under the weight of hard evidence. His closing argument grew frantic, appealing to emotion where facts had failed. Don't let a grieving widow be cheated of her rightful inheritance by a man who abandoned his son for decades, then swooped in like a vulture when money became available. Cecile's closing was simple, unwavering. Ethan Grant made a choice. The evidence shows he was competent. The court should honor his wishes, not overturn them based on speculation and disappointment. Judge Williams recessed the court with the gravity of someone about to decide a life-altering case. Given the complexity of this case, I will review all evidence overnight. I will issue my decision tomorrow at 11 a.m. As we filed out, Joyce caught my arm in the hallway. This isn't over, old man, she hissed. Even if you win, you'll never be worthy of what Ethan built. Her words lingered as Heron and I sat in my truck, both of us silent. Tomorrow morning, everything would change. Sleep, however, had already abandoned me. I sat in the motel parking lot at dawn, watching the sunrise turn the LA skyline gold, wondering, If this was my last morning as a poor man, or my first as someone who'd inherited what many thought I didn't deserve. Harlan emerged from the room with 2 cups of coffee, his face mirroring the sleepless night I'd endured. "Whatever happens today," he said, settling beside me on the truck's tailgate, "you've conducted yourself with honor." The drive back to court was silent, heavy with anticipation. Joyce and Stone were already there, huddled in intense conversation near the courthouse steps. She looked older, the strain of the past month etched into lines that no expensive makeup could hide. Courtroom 314 felt charged, electric with the tension of impending judgment. Judge Williams entered with measured steps, carrying the weight of Solomon's wisdom. She had reviewed the case in private chambers and seemed prepared to deliver finality. After careful review of all evidence and testimony presented, her voice carried to every corner of the silent room. "This court finds the will of Ethan Michael Fox to be legally valid and executed with full mental competency." Joyce's sharp intake of breath shattered the formal atmosphere like breaking glass. Stone remained composed, though I caught him calculating his appeal options. The testator clearly intended to leave his estate to his father. Judge Williams continued, "No credible evidence of undue influence has been presented. Disappointed expectations of an heir do not constitute grounds to overturn a properly executed will. The will stands as written." Case dismissed. In the hallway afterward, Joyce cornered me one last time, her composure finally cracking. "This isn't over, old man. I'll appeal this travesty." "Ethan made his choice," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Maybe it's time to accept it and move on. He never would have chosen you over me if you hadn't poisoned him against your own husband's memory." Her voice trembled with defeat. "Maybe he saw something," I added softly, the words coming from deep inside me. She stormed off, Stone trailing behind with the resigned air of a lawyer, already calculating his next bill. Their war wasn't over, not entirely, but it wasn't mine anymore. At Lax, Harlan's departure gate felt like the end of an era. "Justice won today, friend," he said, gripping my shoulder. "Ethan would be proud of how you handled yourself." "I still don't understand why he did this," I admitted. $24 million to a man who barely visited, barely called. Harlan smiled, the wisdom of decades etched into his face. "Maybe that boy saw what I've always seen. Man worth trusting with anything, including the responsibility of wealth." The drive home to Texas stretched endlessly, 12 hours to process what my life had become. Somewhere near the New Mexico border, understanding dawned like the sunrise after the longest night. Ethan hadn't left me money because I'd manipulated him. He'd left it because I hadn't. In a world full of people like Joyce, who saw him as a bank account with a heartbeat, I'd remained the father who loved him for the boy he'd been, not the fortune he'd built. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was validation, protection for my old age, and proof that, despite distance and conflict, the love between father and son had survived everything Joyce's world could throw at it. Back in my garage 3 days later, I stared at the photograph of 8-year-old Ethan holding his prized baseball. But now, I saw more than a proud boy with a koch eye. Saw the foundation of a man who'd grown up knowing he was loved unconditionally. "Thank you, boy," I whispered to the photo, my voice thick with the understanding that had come almost too late. "I finally get what you were trying to tell me." Outside, Texas stretched beneath an endless sky, and for the first time in months, the future felt full of possibility instead of loss.